Hey y'all, welcome back to Ghosts and Glitter. My name's Rachel and this is part 2 of my favorite books from 2022. If you didn't see part 1, I talked about all my favorite horror books from 2022 because half of my top 10 list was just horror. So this is part 2 where all of these books that I loved from last year are anything but horror, although they might still have some dark elements to them, but we'll get into that. This list is a mix of genres. We have some nonfiction and historical fiction and stuff in between. So before we get into the list, don't forget to like and subscribe. All the books I mentioned will be in the description box down below, as well as any content creators I mention as well. This list is in no particular order. I loved all these books pretty equally. And at the end, I will sprinkle in some honorable mentions as well. So first up, we have the only nonfiction to make the list. I didn't read a ton of nonfiction last year, so the fact that there's one on here anyway is kind of a surprise. So that is Empire of Pain by Radden Keefe. I have not read his other books. I think he has 2 others out right now. I haven't read anything by him before. I listened to this on audio. It's read by him and it is absolutely fantastic. So Empire of Pain is kind of a comprehensive history of the Sackler family. We're following 3 different generations of the Sackler family who, if you did not know, were responsible for making and marketing, Oxycontin, which was a huge catalyst for the opioid crisis. Radden Keefe has done an extensive amount of research, compiled it all into this book, and somehow made it super accessible and understandable and easy to read and digest in this kind of massive, cumulative mashup of history and politics and everything in between. It's easy to follow, it stays on track. I feel like a lot of nonfiction kind of will sprout off into different directions. This is able to give context for everything he talks about while staying completely on track. Didn't lose my attention for 1 minute. And I want to pick up more from him in the future because I think he's an incredibly talented researcher and writer. The next book on the list is a historical fiction novel by Sarah Waters called Fingersmith. I've talked about this in some of my other videos as well. This book took me completely by surprise. I was not expecting to be so immersed and so invested in this book when I picked it up. We're following Sue, who is an orphan that is being raised in this kind of slum house in London by a group of petty thieves who call themselves Fingersmiths. They basically steal things and turn them around to get more money than the things are worth. One day, one of their group, his name is Gentleman, comes visiting and has a proposition for Sue to kind of pull her in to this con that he is planning. His plan is for Sue to act as a maid for this gentlewoman named Maud, and Gentleman will come in and woo Maud and eventually marry her. And he wants Sue to kind of talk him up and convince Maud to marry him. And then once they are married, he will send Maud off to a lunatic asylum so he can then claim her entire inheritance and he will split it with Sue. And Sue agrees. I'll stop there because I feel like if you're not intrigued by that setup, then you just won't be intrigued by this book. I think it was a really intriguing setup. Obviously, I picked the book up. These characters just jumped off the page. It's set in like 1800s London, I believe. And just every single character felt so real. The setting was so rich and vibrant. And I've never read a historical fiction with so many twists and turns. Like, I've never been on the edge of my seat reading historical fiction, but I was with this. I did take a while to finish this as I was reading it 100% physically, and I kind of didn't want it to end. It is a larger book. It's like over 500 pages, but I loved every minute. And the ending, I thought the ending was super well done, and nothing was lacking. I didn't find any plot holes or or unrealistic decisions or reactions or anything. Like, everything wove together perfectly, and I cannot wait to read more of Sarah Waters in the future. The third book on this list is a middle grade fantasy, and it is none other than Amari and the Nightbrothers by B.B. Alston. I loved this book. I had been wanting to get to it ever since it came out a few years ago, and people were just talking about it and hyping it up, and I was like, this sounds fantastic, but can a middle grade really be that good? I obviously haven't read middle grade in a while, because obviously, yes, middle grade can be that good. And Amari and the Nightbrothers brought me so much joy. So we're following our main character, Amari Peters, whose brother Quentin has gone missing. And Amari is convinced that he is still alive, despite the fact that the police and everyone are like, yeah, he's been gone too long. He's not around anymore. So what really sets the story off is Amari finding this briefcase in her room, and it is from her brother Quentin, and it contains a nomination for a summer tryout at the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs. Amari is convinced that this secretive organization is her key to finding Quentin and what happened to him. Amari has to compete against fellow classmates for a place in the Bureau. Just about any mythical creature you can think of is real in this world, which means the options for adventure and battle and conflict are limitless. I think the blurb that says that this book is like Percy Jackson and Men in Black combined is a really actually accurate description. It has the secretiveness and kind of the secret agentness of Men in Black, but for magical things and for middle grade. This book was an absolute blast. I cannot wait to pick up the sequel, and whenever the third one comes out, I will be jumping on that as well, because Amari is such a precious character, and just the world that B.B. Alston created with this secret agent society. I mean, that's everything that middle school Rachel and apparently adult Rachel would have loved. Okay, next up is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This is a book that I've mentioned plenty of times in my other videos, so of course it had to make my top 10 list of 2022. I love T. Kingfisher. She showed up in my other video, so she's made it into both parts of my top 10. This is kind of a dark fairy tale novel. It's not grimdark though, because it's T. Kingfisher, so there's going to be a lot of humor sprinkled in here. After years of seeing her sisters suffer at the hands of an abusive prince, Mara, the shy, convent-raised third-born daughter, has finally realized that no one is coming to their rescue. No one except for Mara herself. We have our main character, Mara, who is on this quest. This is a very quest-driven book, which I hadn't read one in a while, and boy, it made me happy. We have this powerful witch called a grave witch. She has a demon-possessed chicken, which is just, that's fun. And then we have a fairy godmother and a handsome ex-knight and a dog made solely and only of bones. And I love a ragtag cast of characters on a quest. While avid fantasy readers might be kind of frustrated by the lack of world building, this is a small book. I was very pleased with the different places in this world that we got to go. There's a magical yet dangerous forest. There's this barren wasteland that is cursed. We have underground graveyards underneath the castle. If you're looking for like a quick fix for fantasy and maybe something with a little humor to it as well, I think you will enjoy this book. But if you're looking for fleshed out world building, this might not be for you. In true T. Kingfisher style, this book alleviates the dark, more pressing subject matter with a sense of humor. She does this in her horror books as well, and it's something that people either like or don't. So definitely go in knowing that there will be humorous banter, knowing that our characters are going to be using humor to make themselves feel better in these darker situations. which I understand why some people wouldn't like that, but for me, that is a realistic way to handle dark things, is to just laugh about it. And despite the humor, there is still a sense of urgency to the quest. There's still a sense of urgency to all of our characters and their motivations. There was enough character depth to make this book a complete home run for me. The final book of my top 10 is Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. I had never heard of this author before. I first heard of this book in general from Jane over at Bookcase of Doom. And basically I just heard the words queer and religion and I was like, ooh, tell me more. So this is a fictionalized autobiography, which I did not know was a thing that you could do, but now that I do know that, I want more, because what a cool way to tell your story. So obviously, being an autobiography, we are following Jeanette Winterson herself. This is a coming-of-age novel about Jeanette, who was adopted by a radical Pentecostal family. We follow her as she grows up and tries to come to terms with her own queer identity as well as her religious identity, because she's grown up in this highly religious setting. She wants to, appease her mother, appease the church, do the right thing, which is not being queer. And it's her trying to balance these two fundamental identities of herself and like finding who she truly is as a person. I thought it was super unique how the author was able to kind of create these fairy tale stories that she wove into the book that kind of expressed her feelings better than she herself could. And the theme of oranges are not the only fruit shows up a lot throughout the book. The theme of oranges themselves show up a lot throughout the book, and I think it's a really interesting piece of literature, and I want to read more by Jeanette Winterson because I really enjoyed her narrative, her writing style. I've never really read anything like this. Like I said, it's a fictionalized autobiography, which that's so fascinating. I want more of that. That rounds out my top 10 books of 2022, but I don't want to end this video without sprinkling in some honorable mentions as well. The first honorable mention is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a gorgeously written book. This is hot girl summer, forbidden romance, and food, which so good. So this is following our main character, Faye, who has lost the love of her life and longtime partner in a car accident as of like 5 years ago. And 5 years, like during this recovery period, Faye is like, okay, I'm ready to, date again. I'm ready to get back in the thick of things. So she meets this guy who is the son of this famous chef. And he invites her to basically their mansion on this tropical island for the summer, so they can hang out. She can meet his dad, she can work on her art, which is her job. It's just an amazing setup. And she meets his dad, and there's the forbidden romance. And I'll leave it at that. Obviously, her boyfriend's dad being a chef, there is going to be a lot of descriptions of food in here. This is a very foodie book, which I adored. I love good descriptions of food in my books. This did not disappoint. Akwaeke Emezi is an astonishing writer. One of my favorite things about this book was how the characters weren't portrayed as good and bad. They were just humans doing messy human things, making decisions that were good, bad, neutral, decisions that had consequences, messy consequences. It was just people. It wasn't the hero and the villain. And I loved that. I love people being portrayed as people and making mistakes and recovering from those mistakes. I'm really hoping that this is not the last romance that they write, because this was really well done. The next honorable mention is the Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. If you want a quick, humorous adventure book set in or with like Jurassic Park vibes, but less serious than that, I highly recommend this book. I had so much fun reading this. It was exactly what I needed when I read it. It had the science, the adventure, the creatures, the characters, and the humor that I was looking for. And I didn't even know I wanted any of that. I thought this was like horror sci-fi. It's not. It's sci-fi in the vein, like I said, of Jurassic Park, but just less serious. Our main character, Jamie, is stuck doing a dead-end job during the height of the pandemic. I promise that the pandemic is not mentioned besides just in the beginning of this book. It's just the setup to get him working with Kaiju. He runs into an old friend that's like, hey, if you want to make some better money, I work for an animal rights organization. You can work with me. We need someone to do the grunt work. And Jamie says yes. What he doesn't know is that he's going to be going into an alternative dimension to help study and take care of Kaiju. This book is, like I said, it's sciencey without being overwhelming. It's humorous. It's got plenty of Kaiju in it that I think are described really well. There is a sense of urgency with the fact that there are people that know about the Kaiju that maybe don't want to take care of them, maybe want to use them for ulterior motives. The final book for my honorable mentions is Me, Moth by McBride. This is a YA novel that is kind of told in verse and really took me by surprise. I picked it up because I figured it would be a quick read, and it was, but it really hit me harder than I was expecting it to. Basically, we are following our main character, Moth, who lives with her aunt after all of her close family has died in a car crash. She meets this boy, Sonny, who is basically searching for his roots, trying to find out more about his ancestry. So Sonny and Moth go on a road trip, her to process her grief and him to find his ancestry. This book is about self-discovery, it's about healing, it's about love. I know this is written in verse, so to say that this book is poetry is redundant, but the way it's written is so stunning and so easy to digest, with also just it touched my heart. This book was beautiful, and I'm pretty sure this was a debut, so whatever she comes out with in the future, I will be reading because I thought this was just beautifully done. Also, the cover is stunning. With that concludes my top 10 books and honorable mentions of 2022. If you've read any of these, tell me what you thought about them. If you haven't and are interested, I'd love to know which ones I've convinced you to read. And I'm excited for the books that this year brings. So with that, I will see y'all in my next video. Bye!